In this enchanting children's tale, a curious young girl discovers a hidden world of tiny people living in secret. Set in 18th century England, Mary and the Wicklings is a magical story of friendship, bravery, and wonder, perfect for bedtime reading and young imaginations.
This is Mary and the Wicklings by Barrel Coops.
Chapter 1. The Whispering Walls. The west wing of Pomfret House had always been a mystery. It was the part of the house no one used anymore. The doors were locked, the windows dusty, and the furniture covered in white sheets like sleeping ghosts. Mary Pomfret, who was 9 years old and very curious, had always wondered what was behind those doors. One rainy afternoon, when the rest of the house was quiet and her brother Pomfret was busy daydreaming in the library, Mary tiptoed down the long hallway. She had found a key, an old, rusty one, in a drawer in the drawing room. It looked like it might fit the west wing door. It did. The door creaked open slowly, and a gust of cool air brushed her cheeks. Inside, everything smelled of old wood and forgotten stories. The wallpaper was faded, and the chandeliers hung like cobwebs made of glass. Mary stepped inside. She wandered through room after room, counting them as she went. 27, 28, 29. She stopped in a room with a grand fireplace and a tall mirror. The floorboards creaked under her feet. And then she heard it. A whisper. It was soft, like the rustle of paper coming from behind the wall. Mary froze. She pressed her ear to the wallpaper. There it was again, tiny footsteps, like someone tiptoeing in slippers. Then a giggle. A very small giggle. Mary's heart thumped. She wasn't scared, she was excited. She looked around the room and spotted a tapestry hanging beside the fireplace. It showed a knight fighting a dragon, but the bottom corner was curled up. Behind it, Mary found something strange, a tiny wooden door, no taller than her hand, with a round brass knob. She knelt down and touched it. It was warm, as if someone had just used it. "Hello," she whispered. No answer. She knocked gently. Tap tap. Still no answer. Mary sat back on her heels. She didn't know who or what lived behind that door, but she was sure of one thing: someone did. Someone very small. She ran back to the main part of the house, her shoes clicking on the marble floors. She found her brother Pomfret lying on a sofa, staring at the ceiling. "I heard something in the walls," she said breathlessly. "Tiny footsteps. And I found a little door." Pomfret blinked slowly. "Probably mice," he mumbled. "No, not mice. They giggled." "Mice giggle," he said, yawning. Mary frowned. She found her oldest brother Julian in the billiard room, polishing his boots. "I think there are tiny people living in the walls," she said. Julian snorted. "Don't be ridiculous. You've been reading too many fairy tales." Mary sighed. No one believed her. That night, as she lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling and thought about the whispering walls. She wasn't imagining it. She knew what she'd heard. And she was going to find out who lived behind that little door, even if no one else believed her. Chapter 2. A Glimpse in the Dust. The next morning, Mary woke up with one thought in her head: the little door. She dressed quickly, skipped breakfast, which made the cook frown, and tiptoed back to the west wing with a slice of toast in her pocket, just in case she got hungry or needed to make peace with a mouse. The west wing was even quieter than before. Dust floated in the sunlight like tiny fairies, and the air smelled of old books and chimney soot. Mary crept back to the room with the fireplace and the tapestry. The little door was still there. She knocked again. Tap tap. Nothing. She sat cross-legged on the floor and waited. And waited. And waited. Just as she was about to give up, something moved. It was quick, so quick she almost missed it. A flicker of motion near the skirting board. A blur of brown and blue. Mary held her breath. Then she saw it. A tiny person, no taller than her hand, darted across the floor, carrying what looked like a thimble on their back. They wore a patchwork coat and had wild, curly hair. They ran like the wind and disappeared into a crack in the wall. Mary gasped so loudly she nearly scared herself. She scrambled to her feet and ran to the crack, but it was too small for her fingers, let alone her face. She knelt down and peered inside. Nothing but darkness. "I saw you," she whispered. "I really did." She stayed there for a long time, hoping the little person would come back. But they didn't. That afternoon, Mary tried to tell her mother, Lady Pomfret, what she'd seen. "Little people," her mother said, raising an eyebrow. "In the walls." Mary nodded eagerly. Lady Pomfret smiled kindly. "You've always had a vivid imagination, darling. Perhaps you should write it down in a story." Mary didn't want to write it down. She wanted someone to believe her. She found Pomfret in the garden, lying under a tree with a book on his face. "I saw one," she said. "A little person. They were carrying a thimble." Pomfret lifted the book just enough to peek at her. Maybe it was a squirrel. In the house. A very tidy squirrel. Mary groaned. "You're no help at all." That evening, she returned to the West Wing with a plan. She brought a biscuit, a button, and a tiny note she had written in her neatest handwriting. "Hello. My name is Mary. I won't tell anyone. I promise. Would you like a biscuit?" She placed the note and the biscuit near the little door, then tiptoed away and hid behind a dusty armchair. She waited. And waited. And just when she thought nothing would happen, the door creaked open. Out stepped a girl, tiny, with red hair in 2 plaits and a dress made from what looked like a handkerchief. She looked around carefully, then tiptoed to the biscuit. She sniffed it, broke off a crumb, and nibbled. Mary's heart thudded. She didn't move. She didn't even blink. The little girl read the note, then looked around. Her eyes landed on Mary. They stared at each other. One big, one small. Then the little girl gave the tiniest wave. Mary smiled. And just like that, the girl darted back through the door, biscuit crumb in hand, and vanished. Mary sat back, grinning from ear to ear. She wasn't imagining things. The little people were real. Chapter 3. The Wicklings of West Wing. The next day, Mary returned to the West Wing with a basket. Inside were tiny gifts, a thimble filled with honey, a scrap of lace, a button polished until it gleamed, and a folded note that simply said, "I saw you. I won't tell. I'd like to be friends." She placed the basket near the little door and sat down to wait. It didn't take long. The door creaked open, and out stepped the red-haired girl from yesterday. She was followed by a boy with a serious face and a tiny wooden sword tucked into his belt. Then came 2 identical girls with matching dresses and ribbons in their hair. Last of all came a man with a kind face and a woman with a stern one. They were no taller than Mary's hand, but they stood proudly, like they belonged. The man stepped forward. "I'm Sidney Wickling," he said in a voice that was small but strong. "This is my wife, Beatrix. Our children, Stanley, Poppy, and the twins, Mindy and Mandy." Mary smiled. "I'm Mary Pomfret. I live here." "We know," said Beatrix, folding her arms. "We've lived here longer than you." Mary blinked. "You have?" Sidney nodded. "We Wicklings have lived in the walls of Pomfret House for generations. We borrow what we need, but we never take more than we can use." "We don't call it borrowing," Stanley added quickly. "We call it rescuing." "Or repurposing," said Poppy, grinning. Mary giggled. "I like that." Beatrix didn't smile. "You shouldn't be here. It's dangerous for you and for us." "But I want to help," Mary said. "I won't tell anyone. I promise." Sidney looked at her kindly. "You've already helped. That biscuit yesterday was a feast." Mindy and Mandy nodded eagerly. "It had raisins." Mary sat cross-legged on the floor. "How do you live in the walls?" Stanley puffed out his chest. "We have tunnels. Lots of them. They go all through the house and even to other houses nearby. Some tunnels are shared with moles," Poppy added. "But only the polite ones." Mary's eyes widened. "You know moles?" "Just one," said Sidney. "Black Nose. He's a bit grumpy, but he's useful." Beatrix cleared her throat. "We shouldn't be telling her all this." "She's a child," Sidney said gently. "And she's kind." Mary looked at Beatrix. I really won't tell anyone. I don't even think they'd believe me. Beatrix sighed. That's true. Mary leaned closer. Do you have a home behind the wall? Poppy nodded. It's lovely. We have shelves made from matchboxes and beds stuffed with cotton. We even have a chandelier made from a broken necklace. Mary's heart filled with wonder. Can I see it? Beatrix looked horrified. Absolutely not. Sydney chuckled. Perhaps one day, but not yet. Mary understood. She didn't want to scare them. She just wanted to be their friend. Just then, a loud meow echoed down the hallway. Pepper, Stanley hissed. The Wicklings scattered. Sydney pulled the little door shut behind them, and Mary jumped to her feet. She ran to the hallway and saw the big gray cat padding toward her, tail twitching. Shoo, she whispered. Go chase a rat. Pepper blinked at her, unimpressed, then turned and slinked away. Mary returned to the tapestry and sat down again. The door didn't open. But she didn't mind. She had met the Wicklings. And they had names. Chapter 4. Secrets and Soot. Mary couldn't stop thinking about the Wicklings. She spent the morning gathering things she thought they might need: a scrap of velvet from the sewing basket, a broken brooch, a twist of string, and a tiny spoon from her doll's tea set. She tucked everything into her apron and tiptoed back to the west wing. The little door opened before she even knocked. Poppy stood there, smiling. You came back. I brought gifts, Mary said, holding out her apron. Poppy's eyes sparkled. Oh, velvet. Mother will love that. Stanley appeared behind her, peering at the spoon. This is perfect for stirring glue. Mary laughed. Do you use glue? Of course, Stanley said proudly. We make it from flour and water. It's very sticky. Sydney stepped up next. You're very kind, Mary. But you must be careful. If anyone sees you bringing things here. I know, Mary said. I'm being sneaky. Beatrix appeared last, brushing dust from her skirt. Sneaky is good, but quiet is better. Mary nodded solemnly. Poppy tugged her hand. Want to see the tunnel? Mary's eyes widened. Can I? Just a peek, Sydney said. And only the soot tunnel. It's safe enough. They led her to a narrow gap behind the fireplace. Stanley pulled aside a loose brick, revealing a dark passage just wide enough for a Wickling. Mary knelt and peered inside. It was like a secret hallway made of shadows and whispers. The walls were black with soot, and tiny footprints marked the dusty floor. We use this tunnel to get to the sewing room, Stanley explained. And sometimes the pantry. Only when the cat's asleep, Poppy added. Mary shivered. Pepper. Beatrix nodded. That cat has caught more than one Wickling tail. Mary frowned. I'll keep him busy. I'll bring him toys and treats so he stays away. Sydney smiled. That would help. Just then, a loud scritch-scratch echoed from the tunnel. Stanley froze. Rat. Beatrix pulled the children back. Inside. Now. Mary watched as the Wicklings vanished through the little door, leaving her alone in the dusty room. She stared at the tunnel, heart thudding. She didn't like rats. She didn't like the idea of rats chasing her tiny friends. She ran to the kitchen and found a tin of peppermints. She knew rats hated strong smells. She crushed a few and sprinkled them near the tunnel entrance. Then she sat down and wrote a note. I heard the rat. I'll help keep you safe. I promise. She tucked the note under the tapestry and tiptoed away. That night, Mary dreamed of tunnels and tiny footsteps, of velvet beds and matchbox shelves. She dreamed of a world behind the walls where brave little people lived in secret. And she knew, deep in her heart, that she was part of it now. Chapter 5. A Promise in the Pantry. Mary had never been inside the pantry alone before. It was usually bustling with cooks and maids, clattering pots, and the smell of fresh bread. But today, just after tea, it was quiet. The staff were busy preparing supper in the kitchen, and the pantry stood still, filled with shelves of jars and baskets of fruit. Mary tiptoed in, her heart thudding. She wasn't here for snacks. She was here for the Wicklings. Earlier that day, Poppy had whispered through the little door, "We're out of flour." and sugar, and raisins. Mothers trying to make glue and cake at the same time. Mary had giggled. That sounds sticky. It is, Poppy said. Can you help? So here she was, sneaking through the pantry with a small pouch sewn into her apron. She found a jar of flour and scooped a spoonful into the pouch. Then a pinch of sugar. And 3 raisins, just enough for a Wickling-sized treat. She turned to leave and froze. Pepper the cat was sitting in the doorway, tail flicking, eyes narrowed. Mary held her breath. Nice kitty, she whispered. Go chase a broom. Pepper patted closer, nose twitching. Mary reached into her apron and pulled out a bit of sausage from lunch. She tossed it across the room. Pepper pounced, giving Mary just enough time to slip past and dash down the hallway. She didn't stop running until she reached the west wing. The little door opened before she could knock. You made it, Poppy cried. Mary handed over the pouch. Flour, sugar, and raisins. And a bit of adventure. Sydney took the pouch and bowed. You're a true friend, Mary Pomfret. Beatrix looked worried. Did anyone see you? Just Pepper, Mary said. But I bribed him. Stanley grinned. That cat will eat anything. Mary sat down beside the tapestry. I want to help more. I could bring thread or paper or... Careful, Beatrix said. Too much kindness can be dangerous. Mary tilted her head. Why? Because if someone finds out, Beatrix said softly, we'll have to leave. Mary's heart sank. Leave Pomfret House? Sydney nodded. We have tunnels to other houses. But this is our home. Mary looked around the dusty room. I'll keep you safe. I promise. Beatrix studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Then we'll stay. For now. The twins, Mindy and Mandy, appeared with a tiny tray made from a bottle cap. On it sat a crumb of cake, a drop of honey, and a raisin split in 2. Tea time, they sang. Mary laughed and clapped her hands. She didn't eat anything, of course. The portions were far too small. But she sat with them, listening to stories about tunnel races and mole encounters and the time Stanley got stuck in a teacup. And as the candlelight flickered and the shadows danced, Mary felt something warm and wonderful. She belonged. Chapter 6. Trouble in the Tunnels. It was a windy afternoon, and the trees outside Pomfret House bent and swayed like dancers in a storm. Mary was in the west wing, brushing dust off an old armchair, when she heard a knock not on the door, but from inside the wall. Tap, tap, tap. She rushed to the tapestry and pulled it aside. The little door opened, and Poppy's face appeared, pale and worried. Stanley and I are stuck, she whispered. In the sewing tunnel. A rat's blocking the way. Mary's heart jumped. Are you hurt? No, Poppy said, but we can't get past. And it's dark. Stanley's trying to scare it off, but it's not working. Mary didn't hesitate. Show me the way. Poppy led her to a narrow crack behind the fireplace. Mary couldn't fit inside, but she could see the tunnel entrance. She knelt down and peered in. It was pitch black. I need light, she said. She ran to the drawing room and grabbed a small lantern from the mantelpiece. Then she found a hand mirror in the hallway and tied it to the lantern with ribbon. It looked like a strange glowing flower. Back at the tunnel, she lit the lantern and angled the mirror to reflect the light deep into the passage. Stanley, she called softly. Can you see this? A faint voice echoed back. I see it. It's bright. Use it to blind the rat, Mary said. Hold it up and wave it. There was a pause. Then a loud squeak and the sound of tiny feet running. Poppy gasped. It worked. Moments later, Stanley and Poppy crawled out of the tunnel, covered in soot and grinning from ear to ear. You were brilliant, Stanley said. That mirror trick was genius. Mary smiled. I just thought rats wouldn't like bright lights. Sydney arrived, breathless. I heard what happened. Are you both all right? We're fine, Poppy said. Mary saved us. Sydney looked at Mary with deep gratitude. You're one of us now. Beatrix appeared, brushing soot from Stanley's coat. You're lucky she was here. Mary felt warm all over. She hadn't just helped, she'd made a difference. Later, The Wicklings invited her to a celebration. They laid out crumbs of cake, drops of jam, and tiny cups made from walnut shells. The twins sang a song about brave rescues and clever girls. Mary laughed and clapped along. And as the candlelight flickered and the tunnels grew quiet, she knew she'd never forget this day. She had faced a rat. She had saved her friends. And she had earned her place in the world behind the walls. Chapter 7. The Cat and the Clue. Pepper had always been a lazy cat. He liked sunny windowsills, warm cushions, and leftover sausages. But lately, he had taken a sudden interest in the West Wing. Every morning, Mary found him sniffing around the tapestry, tail twitching, ears alert. "He knows something," Stanley whispered one afternoon. "Cats always know." Mary nodded. "I'll distract him." She tried everything, dangling ribbons, tossing treats, even sneaking him into the drawing room with a bowl of cream. But Pepper kept returning to the same spot, nose pressed to the wall. Then came trouble. Julian. Mary was carrying a small pouch of thread and buttons when she bumped into her oldest brother in the hallway. "What's that?" Julian asked, narrowing his eyes. "Just sewing things," Mary said quickly. "For your doll?" "Yes," she lied. Julian frowned. "You've been sneaking around a lot lately. And Pepper's acting strange. What are you up to?" "Nothing," Mary said, trying to walk away. But Julian wasn't convinced. That afternoon, he wandered into the West Wing, whistling as he went. Mary followed at a distance, heart pounding. He stopped near the tapestry and bent down. "What's this?" he muttered. Mary watched in horror as he picked up something from the floor, a tiny shoe, no bigger than his thumb. Julian turned it over in his hand. "This isn't from a doll," he said. "It's handmade. And very small." Mary stepped forward. "It's mine," she said quickly. "I dropped it." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You dropped a shoe that doesn't fit any of your dolls?" Mary shrugged. "It's part of a story I'm writing. About tiny people." Julian stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. "You and your fairy tales." He tossed the shoe back onto the floor and walked away. Mary scooped it up and ran to the tapestry. "They're getting too close," Beatrix said when she heard the story. "We need to move." "No," Mary cried. "I'll be more careful. I'll make sure no one comes near." Sydney looked thoughtful. "There's an attic space. It's dusty but quiet. We could build a new home there." Mary nodded eagerly. "I'll help. I'll bring supplies. We'll make it beautiful." Beatrix sighed. "We'll think about it." That night, Mary sat in her room, holding the tiny shoe in her hand. She had come so close to losing her friends. She had to be smarter, quieter, braver. Because the Wicklings were counting on her. Chapter 8. A Family Divided. Mary was careful after the shoe incident. She stopped bringing things in daylight, avoided the pantry when Julian was nearby, and kept her visits to the West Wing quiet and quick. But she couldn't stop worrying. What if Julian came back? What if he found more clues? One afternoon, she was in the library when she overheard Julian talking to Lord Pomfret. "There's something odd going on in the West Wing," Julian said. "Mary's always sneaking around. And I found a tiny shoe. Not from a doll, hand-stitched. Very strange." Lord Pomfret chuckled. "She's 9, Julian. Let her play." Julian frowned. "I think she's hiding something." Mary slipped away before they saw her. Her heart thudded. She had to warn the Wicklings. She ran to the tapestry and knocked quickly. Sydney opened the door, his face tense. "They're suspicious," Mary whispered. "Julian's talking to Father. He might come back." Beatrix appeared, arms crossed. "We should leave. Tonight." "No," Mary cried. "I'll stop him. I'll make sure no one comes near." Sydney looked torn. "We can't risk it." Just then, Pomfret, Mary's 15-year-old brother, wandered into the West Wing, yawning. Mary froze. Pomfret blinked at her. "What are you doing here?" "Nothing," Mary said quickly. "Just exploring." Pomfret looked around. "This place is dusty. And boring." Mary stepped closer. Can you help me? Pomfret raised an eyebrow. With what? I need you to keep Julian away. Just for a few days. Pomfret shrugged. Why? Mary hesitated. Because I have a secret. And it's important. Pomfret studied her for a moment. Then he smiled. All right. I'll distract him. I'll tell him the West Wing is haunted. Mary grinned. Thank you. Pomfret wandered off, humming to himself. Mary turned back to the little door. See? He'll help. Beatrix still looked unsure. We can't rely on children. Sydney placed a hand on her shoulder. Mary's not just a child. She's a friend. The Wicklings held a family meeting that night. Stanley wanted to stay. Poppy begged to stay. The twins didn't want to leave their matchbox beds. Beatrix sighed.
Fine.
We'll stay, but only if Mary keeps her promise. Mary nodded. I will. I swear it. And so, the Wicklings stayed. For now. Chapter 9. The Wicklings' Decision. The Wicklings were quiet. Mary sat cross-legged on the dusty floor of the West Wing, watching as Sydney paced and Beatrix folded and unfolded a scrap of cloth. Stanley leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Poppy sat beside Mary, twisting a thread around her finger. The twins were unusually still. We can't stay, Beatrix said at last. It's too risky. Julian is suspicious, and the cat won't leave us alone. But we love it here, Poppy whispered. It's our home. Sydney nodded slowly. We've lived in Pomfret House for years. We know every tunnel, every creaky floorboard. But Beatrix is right. If we're discovered. Mary leaned forward. What if you didn't have to live in the walls anymore? Everyone stared at her. I mean, she continued, what if you moved somewhere safer? Somewhere still inside the house, but hidden. Like the attic. Stanley frowned. The attic. It's huge, Mary said. No one goes up there. It's full of trunks and old furniture. You could build a new home. I'll help. Beatrix looked doubtful. It's far from the pantry. I'll bring you food, Mary said. And thread. And buttons. I'll make sure you have everything. Sydney rubbed his chin. It would be safer. And quieter. The tunnels reach the attic, Stanley added. I checked last year. Beatrix sighed. It's a big change. But it might be the only way, Sydney said gently. Mary stood up. I'll start clearing a space. I'll sweep and dust and make it cozy. You'll love it. The Wicklings held another family meeting. Stanley was excited. Poppy was hopeful. The twins wanted to decorate. Beatrix was still unsure, but Sydney promised they'd try. That evening, Mary sneaked up to the attic with a broom and a lantern. She found a corner behind a stack of trunks and began sweeping. She laid out scraps of fabric, arranged matchboxes for shelves, and even placed a broken teacup for a wash basin. It wasn't perfect. But it was a beginning. And when she returned to the West Wing and told the Wicklings, their eyes lit up. We'll move tomorrow, Sydney said. Mary smiled. I'll be waiting. Chapter 10. A New Beginning. The attic was ready. Mary had swept the floor, arranged scraps of fabric into rugs, and built tiny shelves from matchboxes and old drawer handles. She even found a cracked teacup to use as a bath and a broken lantern to hang as a chandelier. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm, quiet, and safe. The Wicklings arrived just after sunset, carrying their belongings in thimbles, thread spools, and tiny satchels made from glove fingers. Mary helped them climb the stairs, keeping watch for Pepper and Julian. This is wonderful, Poppy whispered as she stepped into the attic corner. It smells like old books and cinnamon. Stanley ran his hand along the wall. We could build a lookout here. Mindy and Mandy twirled on the fabric rug. It's like a palace. Beatrix looked around slowly. It'll do. Sydney smiled. It's more than do. It's home. Mary helped them unpack. She placed the matchbox beds in a row, laid out tiny blankets, and tucked a folded handkerchief into a corner for Beatrix's sewing station. Then she hung a small sign above the entrance to their new hideaway. It read, The Wicklings' Nest. Beatrix raised an eyebrow. Nest? Mary grinned. It's cozy. And safe. Like a nest. Sydney chuckled. I like it. Just then, footsteps echoed below. Mary froze. It was Lord Pomfret. She peeked through the attic hatch and saw him speaking to a maid. The west wing is to be closed off, he said. Too much dust. We'll say it's unsafe. No one is to go in without permission. Mary's heart soared. She had done it. The Wicklings were safe. That night, Mary sat with them in the attic, listening to stories about tunnel adventures, mole mishaps, and the time Stanley tried to ride a rat. It didn't end well. The twins sang a lullaby in their tiny voices, and Poppy braided Mary's hair with a ribbon no bigger than a blade of grass. As the candle flickered and the stars blinked through the attic window, Mary opened her notebook and began to write. Dear Journal. Today the Wicklings moved into their new home. They are brave, clever, and very small. I love them. And I think this is only the beginning. She closed the book and smiled. There were more tunnels to explore, more secrets to discover, and many more stories to tell.
This was Mary and the Wicklings by Barrel Coops. This is the first in a series of the Wicklings adventures. Each story is complete and incorporates all the same characters. If you enjoyed this story, check out the playlist under Family Audiobooks for more adventures with Mary and the Wicklings.
I hope you enjoyed my short story. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. I have written over 500 short stories over the years under many pen names. I will be updating these and recording them under the Barrel Coops name. I will be listing them on YouTube as fast as we can get them recorded. They will include historical drama, humor, adventure, romance, period drama, mystery, thriller, war stories, spy stories, revenge, horror, psychological horror, dystopian, disaster, children's stories, love stories, and more. Too many to name. Something for everyone. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. It helps others find my channel. Until next time, thank you for listening to the end.